Hi, I'm Gene Shepard, and I'm reading from my collection of short stories called Wanda, Hickey's Night of Golden Memories and Other Disasters. It was published by Doubleday in the hardcover edition and by Dolphin Press, which is a subsidiary of Doubleday, in the softcover edition. And the story that I'm going to read is Wanda, Hickey's Night of Golden Memories and Other Disasters. Wanda, Hickey's Night of Golden Memories and Other Disasters. Puberty rites in the more primitive tribal societies are almost invariably painful and traumatic experiences. I half dozed in front of my TV set as the speaker droned on in his high nasal voice. One night a week, as a form of masochistic self-discipline, I sentenced myself to a minimum of 3 hours viewing public television. Like so many other things in life, public TV is a great idea, but a miserable reality. Murky films of home life in Kurdistan, jowly English authors being interviewed by jowly English literary critics, pinch-faced ladies demonstrating Japanese brush techniques. But I watch all of it religiously, I suppose because it is there, like Mount Everest. A classical example is the Ogoboga tribe of Lower Micronesia, the speaker continued, tapping a pointer on the map behind him. A shot of an Ogoboga teenager appeared on the screen, eyes rolling in misery, face bathed in sweat. I leaned forward. His expression was strangely familiar. When an Ogoboga reaches puberty, the rites are rigorous and unvarying for both sexes. Difficult dances are performed, and the candidate for adulthood must eat a sickening ritual meal during the post-dance banquet. You will also notice that his costume is as uncomfortable as it is decorative. Again, the poor Ogoboga appeared, clothed in a garment that seemed to be made of feathers and chainmail, the top grasping his Adam's apple like an iron clamp, his tongue lolling out in pain. The adults attend these tribal rituals only as chaperones and observers, and look upon the ceremony with indulgence. Here we see the ritual dance in progress. A heavy rumble of drums, then a moiling herd of sweating, feather-clad dancers of both sexes appeared on the screen amid a great cloud of dust. Of course, we in more sophisticated societies no longer observe these rites. Somehow the scene was too painful for me to continue watching. Something dark and lurking had been awakened in my breast. "What the hell you mean we don't observe puberty rites?" I mumbled rhetorically as I got up and switched off the set. Reaching up to the top bookshelf, I took down a leatherette-covered volume. It was my high school class yearbook. I leafed through the pages of photographs. Beaming biology teachers, pimply-faced students, lantern-jawed football coaches. Suddenly there it was, a sharply etched photograph record of a true puberty rite among the primitive tribes of northern Indiana. The caption read, "The junior prom was heartily enjoyed by one and all. The annual event was held this year at the Cherrywood Country Club. Mickey Isley and his magic music makers provided the romantic rhythms. All agreed that it was an unforgettable evening, the memory of which we will cherish all in the years to come." Yeah, true enough. In the gathering gloom of my Manhattan apartment, it all came back. "Hey, you going to the prom?" asked Schwartz, as we chewed on our salami sandwiches under the stands of the football field, where we preferred for some reason to take lunch at that period of our lives. "Yep, I guess so," I answered as coolly as I could. "Who are you taking?" Flick joined the discussion, sucking at a bottle of knee-high orange. I don't know, I was thinking of Daphne Bigelow." I had dropped the name of the most spectacular girl in the entire high school, if not the state of Indiana itself. "No kidding," Schwartz reacted in a tone of proper awe and respect, tinged with disbelief. "Yeah, I figured I'd give her a break." Flick snorted. Oh, the gassy orange pop going down the wrong pipe. He coughed and wheezed brokenly for several moments. I had once dated Daphne Bigelow, and although the occasion, as faithful readers will recall, was not a riotous success, I felt that I was still in the running, though. Several occasions in the past month had led me to believe I was making a comeback with Daphne. Twice. That's twice. She had distinctly acknowledged my presence in the halls between classes, once actually speaking to me. "Oh, hi there, Fred," she had said in that musical voice. Hi, Daff," I replied wittily. The fact that my name is not Fred is neither here nor there. She had spoken to me. She had remembered my face from somewhere. "You got to go formal," said Schwartz. "I read on a bulletin board where it said you wear a summer formal to the prom." "No kidding." Flick had finished off the orange and was now fully with us. "What the heck's a summer formal?" "Oh, come on, Flick. That's where you wear one of them white coats," I explained. I was known as the resident expert in our group on all forms of high life. That was because my mother was a fantastical Fred Astaire fan, and we saw all of his movies. "You got to rent 'em," I said with the finality of an expert. 2 weeks later, each one of us received a prim white envelope containing an engraved invitation. Quote, "The junior class is proud to invite you to the junior prom, which will be held at the Cherrywood Country Club beginning at 8 p.m. June 5th. Dance to the music of Mickey Isley and his magic music makers. Summer formal required. Signed, the committee." It was the first engraved invitation I'd ever received in my life. The puberty rites had begun. That night, around the supper table, the talk was of nothing else. "Who are you going to take?" my old man asked, getting right to the heart of the issue. Who you were taking to the prom was considered a highly significant decision, possibly affecting your whole life, which in some tragic cases it did. I don't know. I was thinking of a couple of girls," I replied in an offhand manner, as though this slight detail didn't concern me at all. My kid brother, who was taking all this in with sardonic interest, sneered derisively and went back to shoveling in his red cabbage. He had not yet discovered girls. My mother paused while slicing the meatloaf. "Why not take that nice Wanda Hickey?" "Oh, come on, Ma. This is the prom. This is important. You don't take Wanda Hickey to the prom." Wanda Hickey was the only girl who I knew for an absolute fact liked me. Ever since we had been in 3rd grade, Wanda had been hanging around the outskirts of my social circle. She laughed at my jokes, and once when we were 12, actually sent me a valentine. She was always loitering around the tennis courts, the ball diamonds, the alleys where on long summer nights we played kick the can or siphoned gas to keep Flick's Chevy running. In fact, there were times when I couldn't shake her. "Nah, I haven't decided who I'm going to take. I was kind of thinking of Daphne Bigelow." The old man set his bottle of Pabst Blue Ribbon down carefully on the table. Daphne Bigelow was the daughter of one of the biggest men in town. There was, in truth, a street named after her family. "Shee, you're a real glutton for punishment, ain't you?" The old man flicked a spot of foam off the table. He was referring to an unforgettable evening I had once spent with Daphne in my callow youth. "Oh, well, you might as well learn your lesson once and for all." He was in one of his philosophical moods. The White Sox had dropped 9 straight, and a losing streak like that usually brought out his fatalistic side. He leaned back in the chair, blew some smoke toward the ceiling, and went on. And listen to what he said. It would help many if they heard this. "Yep, too many guys settle for the first skirt that shows up and regret it for the rest of their lives." Shee. Ignoring the innuendo, my mother set the mashed potatoes down on the table and said, "Well, I think Wanda is a very nice girl, but then what I think doesn't matter." My mother had the practiced turn of phrase of the veteran martyr, whose role in life was to suffer as publicly as possible. "I got to rent a summer formal," I announced. "Christ, you're going to wear one of them monkey suits?" The old man chuckled. He had never, to my knowledge, worn anything more formal than a sports jacket in his entire life. "I'm going to go down on that place on Holman Avenue tomorrow with Schwartz and see about it. We got to rent suits." "Oh, boy, la-di-da," said my kid brother with characteristic, eloquent understatement, like father, like son. The next day after school, Schwartz and I went downtown to a place we both had passed countless times in our daily meanderings. Hanging out over the street was the cutout of a tall, cream-faced man dressed to the nines in high silk hat, stiff starched shirt, swallow-tail coat, striped morning trousers, and an ivory-headed walking stick held with the easy grace by his dove-gray gloved hand. In red, sputtering neon script underneath it read, "Al Swank Formal Wear. Rented by the day or the hour. Free fittings." We climbed the narrow, dark wooden steps to the second floor. Within a red arrow pointed on the wall were the words, "Swank Formal. Turn left." We went past a couple of dentist offices and a door marked "Bail Bondsman. Freedom for you day or night." "I wonder if Fred Astaire ever comes here," Schwartz said. "Does he rent his suits in this joint?" "Oh, come on, Schwartz. This is serious, for crying out loud." I could feel excitement rising deep inside me. The prom, the engraved invitation, the summer formal, it was all starting to come together. Al's Swank Formal Wear turned out to be a small room with a yellow light bulb hanging from the ceiling, a couple of tall glass cases containing suits on hangers, a counter, and a couple of smudgy full-length mirrors. Schwartz opened negotiations with a swarthy, bald, hawk-eyed, shirt-sleeved man behind the counter. Around his neck hung a yellow measuring tape. He wore a worn vest with a half a dozen chalk pencils sticking out of the pocket. We'd like to, Schwartz began confidently. "Okay, boys, you want to make it big at the prom, am I right? You come to the right place. You're going to that hop out of Cherrywood, right? Out of Cherrywood? And you want a summer formal, right? A summer formal. Hey, Morty," he shouted out. "Hey, Morty, here's two more for that bash at Cherrywood. I'd say 136 short, 140 regular." His practiced eye had immediately sized us up correctly. "Coming up!" Morty's voice echoed from the bowels of the establishment. Humming to himself, Al began to pile and unpile boxes like we weren't even there. I looked around the room at the posters of various smartly turned-out men of the world. One in particular, wearing a summer formal, had a striking resemblance to Cesar Romero, his distinctly gray sideburns distinguished, and a bronzed face contrasted beautifully with the snowy whiteness of his jacket. There was another picture of Tony Martin, who was at that time at the peak of his movie career, usually portraying Arab princes who disguised themselves as beggars in order to make the scene at the marketplace. He was always falling in love with a slave girl who turned out to be a princess in disguise, played by Paulette Goddard. Tony's roguish grin, somewhat fly-specked, showed that he was about to break into desert song. Schwartz was busily inspecting a collection of bow ties displayed under glass in one of the showcases. "Okay, the 36 short, Al, but I'm out of 40s. I'm out of 40s. How about that 42? Just come back from that Dago wedding, okay?" shouted Morty from the back room. "Cut the talk and bring in the goods," Al shouted back, straightening up, his face flushed. "Bring it out already," barked Al. He turned to me. "Hey, this suit just come in from another job. Don't worry about how it looks. We'll clean it up and take it in. It'll fit good. It'll fit just right on you." Morty emerged, a tall, thin, sad man in a gray smock, even balder than Al. He carried two suits on hangers and draped them over the counter, gave Al a dirty look, and stalked back into the shadows. "Okay now, boys. First you." Al nodded to Schwartz. "Take this and try it on behind the curtain. It should fit good, and maybe a little snug in the cuffs, but we'll take 'em out." Schwartz grabbed the hanger and scurried behind a green curtain. Al held up the other suit. In the middle of a dark reddish-brown stain that covered the entire right breast was a neat little hole, right through the jacket. Al turned the hanger around and stuck his finger through the hole. "Hey, Morty!" he shouted. "Morty! What now? How about this hole in the 42? How about the hole? Can you take it out by tomorrow night?" "What do you want? Miracles, for crying out loud?" Morty whined. "Don't worry, kid. We'll fix this up as good as new. You'll never tell it ain't a new coat." Schwartz emerged from the fitting room, shrouded in what looked like a parachute with sleeves. "Perfect. Couldn't be better. shouted Al exultantly. Darting from behind the counter, he grabbed Schwartz by the shoulders, spun him around, and with a single movement ran his hand up into Schwartz's crotch, measured the inseam, spun him around again, made 2 pencil marks on the sleeves, which came almost to his fingertips, yanked up the collar, punching him smartly in the kidney, all the while murmuring in a hoarse stage whisper, "It's made for you, kid, made. Just perfect. Couldn't be better. Look at that. Perfect. Just like tailor-made." Schwartz smiled weakly throughout the entire ordeal. "Okay, kid, take it off. I'll have it ready for you next week." Obediently, Schwartz disappeared into the fitting room. Al turned to me. "Here, slip on his coat, kid." He held it out invitingly. I plunged my arms into its voluminous folds. I felt his iron grip on my shoulder blades as he yanked me upward and spun me around, his appraising eye darting everywhere. "Just perfect. Couldn't be better. Fits like a glove. Take it in a little here. Here, right there. Pull in the bias here." He took out his chalk and made a few marks on the back. "Okay, slip on it, kid." Al again thrust his fingers through the hole. "See this hole? Reweave it like new, and don't worry about the stain. We'll get it out." "Must have been some party, huh? Here, try on these pants, kid." He tossed a pair of midnight blue trousers over the counter at me. Inside the hot little cubicle, as I changed into my pants, I stroked the broad black velvet stripe that lined the outer seam. I was really in the big time now. Oh, they were rumpled, of course, and they smelled strongly of some spilled beverage, but they were truly magnificent. The waist came to just a shade below my armpits, beautifully pleated. Tossing the curtain aside, I shayed out like Cary Grant. "Hey, stand up straight, kid," Al breathed into my ear. An aromatic blast of pastrami and pickled herring made my head reel. "Ah, perfect, just right. Put a little tuck in the waist here." He grabbed several yards of the seat, and a little in here. A sudden thrill of pain as he violently measured the inseam. Now it was all over. "Now," he said back behind his counter once again, "how do you see the shorts, huh? You want 'em straight, or do you want 'em ruffled? Maybe pleated, maybe, huh? Very smart. The pleated models are really good." He indicated several shirts on display in his grimy glass case. Let me see. I would recommend the Monte Carlo model. Real spiffy number." We both peered down at the shirts. The Monte Carlo number was indeed spiffy. Its wide, stiff V-cut collar arching over cascading ribbons of razor-sharp pleats. "Boy, now that's a shirt." Schwartz breathed excited. "Look at that." "That's what I want," I said aloud. "No other shirt would do. The Monte Carlo is my shirt." "Hey, me too," Schwartz seconded. "Okay now," Al continued briskly, "how about studs? You got some? Got studs your own?" What? He'd caught me off guard. I'd heard the word stud before, but never in a tailor shop. "Okay, I guess not. I'll throw 'em in, 'cause you're high-class customers. You get the studs right in the deal. Now, I suppose you want to go first class, right? You kids are going first class?" Al directed this question at both of us, his face assuming a look of concerned forthrightness. Right, he repeated. "Yeah," Schwartz answered uncertainly for both of us. "First class." "I knew it from the minute you two guys walked in. Now I'm going to show you something that is exclusive. Now get this, kids. It's exclusive with Al's Swank formal wear." With an air of surreptitious mystery, he bent over, slid open a drawer, and placed atop the counter an object that unfocused my eyes with its sheer kaleidoscopic brilliance. "No place in town can supply you with a genuine Hollywood paisley cummerbund. It's our trademark, kid." I stared at the magnificent band of glowing, scintillating fabric, already seeing myself a total smash on the dance floor. "And it's only $1 extra. After all, how many times you go to the prom, huh? It's worth 5 times the price. And do you know what? Adolph Manchu wears this model in all his movies. Now, how about it, man?" We both agreed, in unison. After all, you only live once. "Of course, included for only $50 more is our formal bow tie and matching boutonniere. I would suggest a maroon boutonniere." "Sounds great. It's great," I answered. "Isn't that everything?" asked Schwartz with some concern. "Is that all? You gotta be kidding, Sonny. How do you expect to trip the light fantastic without a pair of black patent leather dancing pumps?" "Dancing what?" Shoes, he explained irritably. "And we throw it in the socks for nothing. You rent the shoes, you get the socks. How about that, huh? Well, fine. Fine, okay, that's it, boys. I'll have everything ready the day before the prom. You'll knock 'em dead. Wait till you see them shoes. As we left, another loud argument broke out between Morty and Al, their voices accompanying us down the long flight of narrow stairs and out into the street. Step by step in the ancient tradition, the tribal ritual was being acted out. The prom, which was now 2 weeks off, began to occupy our minds most of the waking day. The semester had just about played itself out. Our junior year was almost over. The trees and the flowers were in blossom. Great white clouds drifted across deep blue skies, and baseball practice was in full swing, but somehow this spring was different from the rest. The prom was something that we had heard about since our earliest days. A kind of golden aura hung over the word itself. Every couple of days, the PTA at school announced that the prom committee was meeting or requesting something. There was only one thing wrong. As each day ticked inexorably by toward that magic night at the Cherrywood Country Club, I still could not steel myself to actually seek out Daphne Bigelow and ask her the fatal question. Time and again, I spotted her in the halls, drifting by on gossamer wings, her radiant complexion casting a glow on all those around her, her brilliant smile lighting up the corners of 202 homeroom. But each time, I broke into a fevered sweat and chickened out at the last instant. The weekend before the prom was sheer torture. Schwartz, always efficient and methodical, had already made all of his plans. We sat on the back steps of my porch late Saturday afternoon, watching Lud Kissel next door struggle vainly to adjust the idling speed on his time-ravaged carburetor so that the family Nash didn't stall at 35 miles an hour. He had been drinking, of course, so it was quite a show. Have you ever watched a drunk adjust a carburetor? How you doing with Daphne Bigelow? Asked Schwartz sardonically, knowing full well the answer. How you doing, buddy? Oh, well, that I haven't had time to ask her, I lied. You want to get on a stick, said Schwartz. There's only a week left, buddy. You better do it. Well, who you got lined up? I asked, tossing a pebble at old Lud, who was now asleep under his running board. Clara May Mattingly, Schwartz replied in a steady, expressionless voice. I was surprised. Clara May was one of those shadowy, quiet girls who were rarely ever mentioned outside of honor rolls and stuff like that. She wore gold-rimmed glasses and still had pigtails. Yep, Schwartz added smugly, gratified by my reaction. Boy, she sure could spell, was all I could think to say that was good about her, other than the fact that she was female. Oh, yeah, sure can, Schwartz agreed. He, too, had been a great speller in our grade school days, and on more than one occasion Clara May had demolished him with a brilliant display of virtuosity in a school-wide spell-down, a form of verbal Indian wrestling, now almost extinct, but which at one time was a Waterloo for many of us among the unlettered. Clara May had actually once gone to the state final and had lost out to a gangly farm girl from downstate who apparently had nothing else to do down there on the farm but read Webster's through the long winter nights. You going to send her a corsage? I asked. Already ordered it at the Cupid Florist. Schwartz's self-satisfaction was overflowing. An orchid? Yep, cost $8. Holy God, $8! I was now truly impressed. That includes a gold pin for it. Our conversation trailed off as Lud Kissel rose heavily to his knees and crawled off down the driveway on all fours, heading for the Bluebird Tavern, which was closed on this day. Lud always got restless in the spring. A few hours later, after supper, I went out gloomily to water the lawn, a job that purportedly went towards earning my allowance, which had reached an all-time high that spring of $3 a week. Fireflies played about the cottonwoods in the hazy twilight. But I was troubled. 1 week to go, less now because you couldn't count the day of the prom itself. In the drawer where I kept my socks and scout knife, buried deep in the back, were 24 $1 bills, which I had saved for the prom. Just as deep in my cowardly soul, I knew I could never ask Daphne Bigelow to be my date. Refusing to admit it to myself, though, I whistled moodily as I sprayed the irises and watched a couple of low-flying bats as they skimmed over the lawn and up into the poplars. Mrs. Kissel, next door, creaked back and forth on her porch swing, a copy of True Romances open on her lap as she waited for Lud's return with his usual snootful. My kid brother came out onto the porch, and from sheer habit, I quickly shot a stream of water over him, catching him in midair as he leaped high to avoid the stream. A beautiful deflection shot. I had led him just right. He caught it full in the chest, his yellow polo shirt clinging to his ribs wetly like a second skin. Bawling at the top of his lungs, he disappeared into the house and slammed the screen door behind him. Now, ordinarily, this small triumph would have cheered me up for hours, but tonight I tasted nothing but ashes. Suddenly his face reappeared in the doorway. "I'm going to tell Ma!" he yelled. Instantly, like a cobra, I struck. Sweeping the stream quickly over the screen door, I got him full in the face. I got another shot right at him. Another scream of rage, and he was gone. Again, I sank into my moody sea of reflection. Was I going to boot the prom? Flick had already asked Janie Hutchinson, a tall, funny girl who had been in our class since kindergarten, and Schwartz was lined up with Clara May. All he had talked about that week had been that crummy orchid and how good a dancer he was. Flick had stopped asking me about Daphne ever since the past Wednesday, when I had gotten mad because he'd been needling me. All week I'd been cleaning up my Ford for the big night. My only true and total love, that Ford. It was a Ford V8, a convertible that I had personally rebuilt at least 35 times. I knew every valve spring personally. I had honed each valve, burnishing each nut and bolt she carried. Tuesday, I Simonized her completely. Wednesday, I repeated the job. And Thursday, I had polished the chrome until my knuckles ached and my back was stiff. I had spent the past 2 days minutely cleaning the interior, using a full can of saddle soap on the worn leather. Everything was set to go, except for one thing. No girl. A feeling of helpless rage settled over me as I continued spraying the lawn. I flushed out a poor hapless caterpillar from under a bush, squirting him mercilessly, full blast, until he washed down the sidewalk and disappeared into the weeds. I felt a twinge of evil satisfaction as he rolled over and over helplessly. It was getting dark. All that was left of the sun was a long purple-orange streak along the western horizon. The glow of the steel mills to the north and east began to light up the twilight sky. I had worked my way down to the edge of our weedy, pockmarked bed of sod when out of the corner of my eye I noticed something white approaching out of the gloom. I sprinkled on, not knowing that another piece was being fitted into the intricate mosaic of adolescence. I kicked absent-mindedly at a passing toad as I soaked down the dandelions. "What are you doing?" So deeply was I involved in self-pity that at first my mind wouldn't focus. Startled, I swung my hose around, spraying the white figure on the sidewalk 10 feet away. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, seeing at once that I had washed down a girl dressed in white tennis clothes. "Oh, hi, Wanda. I didn't see you there." She dried herself with a Kleenex. "What are you doing?" she asked again. "I'm sprinkling the lawn, stupid." The toad hopped past, going the other way now. I squirted him briefly out of general principles. "You been playing tennis?" Since she was wearing tennis clothes and was carrying a racket, it seemed the only thing to say. "Me and Eileen Akers were playing down at the park," she answered. Eileen Akers was a sharp-faced, bespectacled girl I had inexplicably been briefly in love with in the 3rd grade. I had come to my senses by the time we got into 4B. It was a narrow escape. By then, I had begun to dimly perceive that there was more to women than being able to play a good game of run, sheep, run. "I'm sure glad school's almost over," she went on, when I couldn't think of anything to say. "I can hardly wait. I never thought I'd be a senior." "Yeah," I said. "I'm going to summer camp this season. Are you?" "Yeah," I lied. I had a job already lined up for the summer, working for a surveyor. The next camp I would see would be in the Ozarks, and I'd be carrying an M1. Wanda swung her tennis racket at a June bug that flapped by barely above stall speed. She missed. The bug soared angrily up and whirled off into the darkness. "Are you going to college when you graduate next year?" she asked. For some reason, I didn't like the drift of the conversation. It was just going bad. "Yeah, I guess so, if I don't get drafted." "My brother's in the Army. He's in the artillery." Her brother, Bud Hickey, was a tall, laconic type, 4 or 5 years older than both of us. "Yeah, I heard. Does he like it much?" "Well, he doesn't write much," she said. "But he's going to get a pass next September before he goes overseas." "How come he's in the artillery?" I asked. "Oh, I don't know. They just put him there. I guess because he's tall." "What the heck's that got to do with it? Do they have to throw the shells or something? He's tall, right?" "Oh, I don't know. They just did it." Then it happened, without thinking, without even a shadow of a suspicion of planning. I actually heard myself asking, "You going to the prom?" "I don't know." For a long instant she said nothing, just that. Swung her tennis racket at the air. "Oh, I guess so," she finally answered, weakly. "Yeah, it's going to be great," I said, trying to change the subject. "Yeah, great. Who are you going with?" She said it as if she really didn't care one way or the other. "Well, I haven't exactly made up my mind yet." I bent down unconcernedly and pulled the giant milkweed out by the roots. "Neither have I," she said. It was then that I realized there was no sense fighting it. Some guys are born to dance forever with the Daphne Bigelows, on shining ballroom floors under endless starry skies. Others, well, they do the best they can. I didn't know that yet, but I was beginning to suspect something. Wanda, yes, Wanda, would you, you see, I was thinking, yes, here I go in, over the horns. "Wanda, how about going to the prom with me?" She stopped twitching her tennis racket. The crickets cheeped. The spring air was filled with the sound of singing froglets. A soft breeze carried with it the promise of a rich summer and the vibrant aromas of a nearby refinery. She began softly. "Well, of course I've had a lot of invitations, but I didn't say yes to any of them yet." "I guess it would be fun to go with you." "Yeah, it'd probably be fun," she said gamely. "Yeah, well, naturally, I've had 4 or 5 girls who wanted to go with me, but I figured that, well, what the heck, they were mostly jerks anyway, and, I meant to ask you all along." Boing! The die was cast. There was no turning back. It was an ironclad rule. Once a girl was asked to the prom, only a total crumb would even consider ducking out of it. There had been 1 or 2 cases in the past, but the perpetrators had become social pariahs, driven from the tribe to fend for themselves in the unfriendly woods. Later that night, hunched over the kitchen table, still somewhat numbed by the unexpected turn of events, I chewed thoughtfully on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, while my mother, hanging over the sink in her rump-sprung Chinese red chenille bathrobe, droned on monotonously. "You're just going to have to stop squirting Randy." "Yeah," I answered, my mind light years away. "You got his new Flash Gordon T-shirt all wet." "Sorry," I said automatically. It was a phrase I used often in those days. Sorry. "It shrunk, and now he can't wear it." "Why not?" I asked. "It comes up to his chest now." "Well, why can't he stretch it?" "You just stop squirting him, that's all. You hear me? You ruined that shirt." "That's a silly T-shirt anyway," I said truculently. "You heard what I said. No more squirting." That ended the conversation. Later in bed, I thought briefly of Daphne Bigelow, but was interrupted by a voice from the bed on the other side of the room. "You rotten jerk, you squirted my T-shirt." "Oh, shut up." "You wait, I'm going to get you." I laughed raucously. My kid brother wailed in rage. "Shut up, you two! Cut out the fighting, or I'll come up there and do some head-knocking." The old man meant what he said, and we knew it. I promptly fell asleep. It had been a long and tumultuous day. I broke the news to Schwartz the next morning after biology. We were hurrying through the halls between classes on our way to our lockers, which were side by side on the 2nd floor. "Hey, Schwartz, how about double dating for the prom?" I asked. I knew he had no car, and I needed moral support anyway. Hey, great, I'll help you clean up the car. I've already Simonized her. She's all set. Are you going to send Daphne an orchid or what? Well, no, I said lamely, hoping he'd forget what he asked. What do you mean? You got to send a corsage. Well, I am going to send a corsage, stupid. I thought you said you weren't. I just couldn't shake him off. I never said I wasn't going to send a corsage. Are you nuts? You just said you weren't going to. I'm not going to send a corsage to Daphne Bigelow. You asked me if I was going to send a corsage to Daphne. I'm not. Boy, she's going to think you're a real cheapskate. It was getting ridiculous. Schwartz was being even more of a numbskull than usual. Schwartz, I have decided not to ask Daphne Bigelow to the prom. He looked directly at me, which caused him to slam at the two strolling freshman girls. Their books slid across the floor where they were trampled underfoot by the thundering mob. Well, who are you taking? He asked, oblivious to their shrieks of dismay. Wanda Hickey. Wanda Hickey? Schwartz was completely thrown by this staggering bit of news. Wanda Hickey had never been what you would call a major star in our Milky Way. We walked on saying nothing, until finally, as we opened our lockers, Schwartz said just one thing. Well, she sure is good at algebra. It was true. Wanda was an algebra shark, in the same way that Clara May was a spelling nut. Maybe we both got what we deserved, me and Schwartz together. Later that day in the study hall, after I had polished off a history theme on some stupid thing like the Punic Wars, I got to thinking about Wanda. I could see her sitting over there on the other side of the room, a dusty sunbeam filtering through the window and lighting up her straw-colored hair. She was kind of cute. I'd never really noticed it before. Ever since second grade, Wanda had just been there, along with Eileen Akers, Helen Weathers, and all the other girls who, along with me and Schwartz and Flick and Josaway and the rest, had moved together step by step up the creaky ladder of education. And here I was, at long last, taking Wanda Hickey to the prom, the only junior prom I would ever attend in my life. As I chewed at the end of my fake marble wherever pen, I watched Wanda through half-closed eyes in the dusty sunbeam as she read The Lady of the Lake. Ahead of me, Schwartz dozed fitfully, as he always did in study hall, his forehead occasionally bumping the desk. Flick, to my right, struggled sullenly over his chemistry workbook. We both knew it was hopeless. Flick was the only one in our crowd who consistently flunked everything. Just flunked. The whole bit. The prom was just 5 days away. This was the last week of school. Ahead, our long summer in the sun stretched out like a lazy yellow road. For many of us, it would be the last peaceful summer we were ever to know. Mr. Wilson, the study hall teacher, wandered aimlessly up and down the aisles, pretending he was interested in what we were pretending to be doing. From somewhere outside drifted the cries of a girls' volleyball game, while I drew pictures of my Ford on the inside cover of my 3-ring notebook, front view, side view, rear view, outlining the drawings with ink. That morning on my way to school, I had gone down to the Cupid florist shop and ordered an orchid. My $24 were shrinking fast. The $8 bite for the orchid didn't help. Schwartz and I were going to split on the gas, which would come to maybe $1 apiece. After paying for the summer formal, I'd be down to a fast $10 left for the night. As I sat in study hall, I calculated, writing the figures down, adding and subtracting, but it didn't come out to much, no matter how I figured it. Schwartz passed a note back to me. I opened it. How about the Red Rooster afterward? Okay. I wrote underneath, where else, and passed it back. The Red Rooster was part of the tribal ritual. It was the place you went after a big date, if you could afford it. I glanced over across the room at Wanda and caught her looking at me. There she is. She's looking now. She instantly buried her head in her book. Good old Wanda. What a dog. On the way home from school every day that week, of course, all we talked about was the prom. Flick was double dating with Josaway, and we were all going to meet afterward at the Rooster and roister on until dawn, drinking deeply of the sweet elixir of the good life. The only thing that nagged me now was financial. $10 didn't look as big as it usually did. Ordinarily, $10 would have gotten me through a month of just fooling around. But believe me, the prom was big time. Friday night, as I sat in the kitchen before going to bed, knocking down a liverwurst on whole wheat and drinking a glass of chocolate milk, the back door slammed open, and in breezed the old man, carrying his bowling bag. Friday night was his big night down at the pinball. He was a fanatical bowler, and a good one, too. He slid the bag across the floor, pretending to lay one down the groove, his right arm held out in a graceful follow-through, right leg trailing in the classic bowling stance. "Hey, right in the pocket," he said with satisfaction. "How'd you do tonight?" I asked. Not bad. Had a 207 game, damn near cracked 600. Whew. He opened the refrigerator and fished around for a beer, then sat down heavily, took a deep drag from the bottle, burped loudly, and said, "Well, kid, tomorrow's a big day, ain't it?" "Yep," I answered, "sure is." "You taking Daphne Bigelow?" he asked. "Nah. Wanda Hickey." "Oh, yeah? Really?" "Well, you can't win them all, right? Wanda's old man is some kind of a foreman at the mill or something, huh?" "I guess so. He drives a Studebaker Champion, don't he? The green two-door with the white walls?" The old man had a fine eye for cars. He judged all men by what they drove. Apparently a guy who drove a two-door Studebaker was not absolutely beyond the pale. "It ain't a bad car, except they all burn oil after a while," he mused, omitting no aspects of the Studebaker. "You know, they used to have a weak front end, kid. Bad kingpins." He shook his head critically, opening another beer, and reached for the rye bread. I said nothing, lost in my own thoughts. My mother and kid brother had been in bed for an hour or so. We were, for all practical purposes, alone in the house, me and the old man. Next door, Mrs. Kissel threw out a pail of dishwater into the backyard with a whoosh. Her screen door slammed. "How you fixed for tomorrow night?" the old man asked, suddenly swirling his beer bottle around to raise the head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, how you fixed? My father never talked money to me. I got my allowance every Monday, and that was it." "Well, I got about $10. That was all he said. After sitting in silence for a minute or two, he said, You know, kid, I always wished I could have gone to a prom." How can you answer something like that? He had barely gotten out of 8th grade when he had to go to work, and he never had stopped for the rest of his life. "Oh, well, what the hell," he finally answered himself. He cut himself a slice of boiled ham and made a sandwich. "Oh, boy, kid, I was really hot tonight. Got a string of 6 straight strikes in the second game." The old hook was moving. "Getting a lot of wood, Rubber Band." He always called me names like that when he got philosophical. Rubber Band, Icebox, Rat Trap. He reached into his hip pocket, took out his wallet, and he said, "Look, don't tell Ma." He handed me a $20 bill. "I had a couple of bets going on in the second game, and I'm a money bowler." He certainly was that. No doubt of it. In his early teens, the old man had scrounged out a living as a pool shark in Chicago, and he had never lost his touch. I took the 20, glommed onto it the way a proverbial drowning man grabs at a straw. I was so astounded at this unprecedented gesture that it never occurred to me to say thanks. He would have been embarrassed if I had. A miracle had come to pass. There was no doubt about it. The prom was going to be an unqualified gas. The next day dawned, bright and sunny, as perfect as a June day can be in a steel mill town. Even the blast furnace dust that drifted steadily and aimlessly through the soft air glowed with promise. I was out early, dusting off the car. It was going to be a top-down night. Oh, if there's anything more romantic than a convertible with the top down in June, going to a prom, I'd like to hear about it. Cleopatra's barge couldn't have been much more seductive. My kid brother, his diminutive Flash Gordon T-shirt showing a great expanse of knobby backbone and skinny belly, yapped around me as I toiled over the ford. "Look what you done to my T-shirt, you jerk!" he whined, his runny nose trickling. He was in the midst of his usual spring cold. Now that would be superseded by his summer cold, which lasted nicely to the whopper he always got in the fall, which would, of course, be only a prelude to his winter-long monster cold that carried him through Christmas and the following spring. "Stay away from the fender, you crumb! You're dripping on it!" I shouted angrily, shoving him away. "Flash Gordon's only about an inch high now. Look what you did to my shirt." I couldn't help laughing. It was true. Flash had shrunk, along with the shirt, which Randy had earned by doggedly eating 3 boxes of Wheaties, saving the box tops and mailing them in with 25 cents that he had by dint of ferocious self-denial saved from his 30-cent weekly allowance. "Look, kid, I'll get you another Flash Gordon T-shirt. Will you shut up?" "You can't. They're not giving them away anymore. They're giving away Donald Duck beanies with a propeller on top now. No more shirts." "Well, then stretch the one you've got now, stupid." "It won't stretch. It keeps getting littler." He bounced up and down on the clothes pole, jiggling the clothesline of my mother's wash. Within 3 seconds, she was out on the back porch, yelling, "Cut it out with the clothes pole, kid!" Sullenly, he slid off onto the ground. I went back to work until the Ford gleamed like a rare jewel. Then I went into the house to begin the even more laborious process of getting myself in shape for the evening ahead. Looking into the mirror after closing and locking the bathroom door, I took 2 showers, wearing a brand-new bar of Lifebuoy down to a nub. I knew what happened to people who didn't use it every week. Little comic strips underneath Moon Mullins told endless tales, terrible tales, of disastrous proms due to dreaded B.O. It would not happen to me. I then shaved for the 2nd time that week, using a new Gillette blue blade. As usual, when an important shave was executed, I nicked myself nastily in several places. "Son of a bitch," I muttered, plastering the wounds with little pieces of toilet paper. Carefully, I went over every inch of my face, battling that age-old enemy, the blackhead, and polished off the job with a copious application of stinging aqua velva. Next, I attacked my hair, combing and recombing, getting just the right insouciant pitch to my pride and joy, my D.A. haircut, the good old duck's ass. Tonight, I would be a truly magnificent specimen of lusty manhood. Twilight was fast approaching when I emerged from the bathroom, redolent of rare aromas, pink and svelte. But the real battle had not yet begun. Laid out on my bed was my beautiful summer formal. Al was right. The elegant white coat truly gleamed in virginal splendor. Not a trace of the red stain or the sinister hole could be detected. The coat was ready for another night of celebration, its lapels spotless, its sleeves smooth and uncreased. Carefully, I undid the pins that festooned my pleated Monte Carlo shirt. It was the damnedest thing I'd ever seen. Once I got it straightened out, long, trailing gauze-like shirt tails, a crinkly front that thrummed like sheet metal, and a collar that seemed to be carved out of white rock. I slipped it on. Panic! It had no buttons, just holes. Rummaging around frantically in the box the suit came in, I found the cellophane envelope containing little round black things. Ripping the envelope open, I poured them out. There were 5 of them, 2 of which immediately darted under the bed. From the looks of the remaining 3, they certainly weren't buttons, but they'd have to do. Although I didn't know it at the time, I had observed a classic maneuver executed by at least 1 stud out of every set rented with a tux. Down on my hands and knees, already beginning to lose my Lifebuoy sheen, sweat popping out here and there, I scrambled around for the missing studs. The adolescent torture ordeal was well underway, although I did not know it at the time. 7 o'clock was approaching with such rapidity as to be almost unbelievable. Schwartz, Clara May, and Wanda would already be waiting for me, and here I was, in my underwear, crawling around on my hands and knees. Finally, amid the dust and dead spiders under my bed, I found the 2 studs, cowering together behind a hardball I'd lost 3 months earlier. Back before the mirror again, I struggled to get them in place between the concrete slits of the shirt. Sweat was beginning to show under my arms. I got 2 in over my breastbone, and now I tried to get the one at the collar over my Adam's apple. No way, it was impossible. I could feel from deep within me several sobs beginning to form. The more I struggled, the more ham-fisted I became. "Oh, no, 2 black thumb smudges appeared on the snow-white collar. Ma!" I screamed. "Look at my shirt!" She rushed in from the kitchen carrying a paring knife and a pan of apples. "What's the matter?" "Look!" I pointed at the telltale prints. My kid brother cackled in delight when he saw the trouble I was in. "Don't touch it," she barked, taking control immediately. Dirty collars were her métier. She had fought them all her life. She darted out of the room and returned instantly with an art gum eraser. "Now, hold still." I obeyed as she carefully worked the stud in place and then artistically erased the 2 monstrous thumbprints. Never in my life had I experienced a collar remotely like the one that now clamped its iron grasp around my windpipe. Hard and unyielding, made of concrete, it dug mercilessly into my throat. A mere sample of what was to come. "Where's your tie?" she asked. I had forgotten about that detail. It must be, in the box," I managed to gasp out. The collar had almost paralyzed my voice box. She rummaged around and came up with the bow tie. It was black and had 2 metal clips. She snapped it onto the wing collar and stood back. "Now, look at yourself in the mirror." I didn't recognize myself. She picked up the midnight blue trousers and held them up so that I could slip into them without bending over. True to his word, Al had indeed taken in the seat. The pants now clamped me in a vice-like grip that was to damn near emasculate me before the evening was out. I sucked in my stomach, buttoned the waistband tight, zippered up the fly, and stood straight as a ramrod. It was the only way I could stand before the mirror. I had no other choice. "Give me your foot." My mother was down on all fours, pulling the silky black socks onto my feet. Then, out of a box on the bed, she removed the gleaming pair of patent leather dancing pumps, grabbed my right foot, and shoved it into one of them, using her finger as a shoehorn. I tromped down. She yelled in pain. "I can't get my finger out!" I hobbled around, taking her finger with me. "Stand still!" she screamed. I stood like a crane, 1 foot in the air, with her finger jammed deep into the heel. "Randy, come here! Randy!" she yelled. My kid brother, who was sulking under the daybed, ran into the room. "Pull his shoe off, Randy, now!" She was frantic. "What for?" he asked sullenly. "What do you mean, what for? Don't ask stupid questions. Do what I say." I was getting an enormous cramp now in my right buttock. "Stand still," she yelled. "You're breaking my finger." The pain roared up and down my back. Randy looked on impassively, observing a scene that he was later to weave into a family legend, embroidering it more and more as the years went by, making himself the hero, of course. "Randy, take off the shoe!" Her voice quavered with pain and exasperation. He squirted my T-shirt. "If you don't take off his shoe this instant, you're going to regret it." This time her voice was low and menacing. We both knew the tone. It was the end of the line. Randy bent over and tugged at the shoe. My mother toppled over backward in relief, rubbing her index finger, which was already getting blue. "Go back under the daybed," she snapped. He scurried out of the room. I straightened out my leg, the cramp subsiding like a volcano in the marrow of my bones, and the gleaming pumps were put in place without further incident. I now stood, encased as in armor. "What's this thing?" she asked from behind me. I executed a careful 180-degree turn. "Oh, Al says that's a cummerbund." Her face lit up like an Italian sunrise. A cummerbund! She had seen Fred Astaire in many a cummerbund while he spun down marble staircases with Ginger Rogers in his arms. But it was the first actual specimen she had ever been close to. She picked it up reverently, its paisley brilliance lighting up the room like an iridescent jewel. "How does it work?" she asked, examining it closely. Before I could answer, she said, "Oh, I see. It has clips in the back. Hold still." Around my waist it went. She drew it tight. The snaps clicked into place. It rode snugly halfway up my chest. She picked up the snowy coat and held it out. I lowered my arms into it and straightened up. She darted around to the front, closed the single button, and there I stood. Adonis. Posing before the full-length mirror on the bathroom door, I noted the rich accent of my velvet stripes, the gleam of my pumps, the magnificent dash and sparkle of my high-fashion Hollywood cummerbund. What a sight, what a feeling! This is the way life should be. This is what it's all about. I heard my mother call out from the next room. "Hey, what's this thing?" She came out, holding a cellophane bag containing a maroon object. "Oh, that's my boutonniere." "Your what?" "It's a thing for the lapel, like a fake flower." It was the work of an instant to install my elegant wool carnation. It was the crowning touch. I was so overwhelmed that I didn't care about the fact that it didn't match my black tie, as Al had promised. With the cummerbund I was wearing, no one would notice anyway. I was fantastic. Taking my leave, as Cary Grant would have done, I sauntered out the front door, turning to give my mother a jaunty wave, just in time for her to call me back to pick up Wanda's corsage, which I had left on the front hall table. Slipping carefully into the front seat of my Ford, with the cellophane-top box safely beside me, I leaned forward slightly to avoid wrinkling the back of my coat, started the motor up. Oh, and I shoved off into the warm summer night. A soft June moon hung overhead. The Ford purred like a kitten. When I pulled up before Wanda's house, it was lit up from top to bottom. Even before my brakes had stopped squealing, she was out on the porch, her mother fluttering about her, her father lurking in the background, beaming. With stately, magnificent tread, I moved up the walk. My pants were so tight that if I had taken one false step, God knows what would have happened. In my sweaty aqua velva-scented palm, I clutched the ritual largesse in its shiny cellophane box. Wanda wore a long turquoise taffeta gown, her milky skin and golden hair radiating in the glow of the porch light. This was not the old Wanda. For one thing, she didn't have her glasses on, and her eyes were unnaturally large and liquid, the way the true myopia victims always are. "Gee, thanks for the orchid," she whispered. Her voice sounded strained. In accordance with the tribal custom, she, too, being mercilessly clamped by straps and girdles. Her mother, an almost exact copy of Wanda, only slightly puffy here and there, said, "You'll take care of her now, won't you?" "Now, Emily, don't start yapping," her old man muttered in the darkness. "They're not kids anymore." They stood in the door as we drove off through the soft night towards Schwartz's house, our conversation stilted, our excitement almost at the boiling point. Schwartz rushed out of his house, his white coat like a ghost in the darkness, his hair agleam with Brill cream, and surrounded by a palpable aura of Lifebuoy. 5 minutes later, Clara May piled into the back seat beside him, carefully holding up her daffodil yellow skirts, her long, slender neck arched. She, too, wasn't wearing her glasses. I'd never realized that a good speller could be pretty. Schwartz, a good half a head shorter, laughed nervously as we tooled on towards the Sherrywood Country Club. From all over town, other cars, polished and waxed, carried the rest of our junior class to their great trial by fire. The club nestled amid the rolling hills, where the Sinclair oil refinery aroma was only barely detectable. Parking the car in the lot, we threaded our way through the starched crowd, the girls' girdles creaking in unison, to the grand ballroom. Japanese lanterns danced in the breeze through the open doors of the garden, bathing the dance floor in a fairy tale glow. I found myself saying things like, "Why, hello there, Albert, how are you?" And, "Yes, I believe the weather is perfect indeed." Only Flick, the unregenerate Philistine, failed to rise to this occasion. Already rumpled in his summer formal, he made a few tasteless wisecracks as Mickey Isley and his magic music makers struck up the sultry sounds that had made them famous in every steel mill town that ringed Lake Michigan. Dark and sensuous, the dance floor engulfed us all. I felt tall and slim and beautiful, not realizing at the time that everybody feels that way wearing a white coat and rented pants. I could see myself standing on some mysterious balcony, a lonely, elegant figure, looking out over the lights of some exotic city, a scene of sophisticated gaiety behind me. There was a hushed moment when Mickey Isley stood in the baby spot, his wavy hair shining before a microphone shaped like a chromium bullet. "All right, boys and girls," the metallic ring of feedback framed his words in an echoing nimbus. "And now, something really romantic, a request. When the swallows come back to Capistrano, we're going to turn the lights down for this one." Oh, wow! The lights faded even lower. Only the Japanese lanterns glowed dimly, red, green, yellow, and blue, in the enchanted darkness. It was unquestionably the high point of my existence. Wanda and I began to maneuver around the floor. My sole experience in dancing had been gained from reading Arthur Murray ads and practicing with a pillow for a partner behind the locked door of the bathroom. As we shuffled across the floor, I could see the black footprints of the ad before my eyes, marching on a white page, 1, 2, 3, and then the white one that said, pause. Back and forth, up and down, we moved metronomically. My box step was so square that I went in little right angles for weeks afterward. The wool carnation rode high up on my lapel and was beginning to scratch my cheek, and an insistent itch began to nag at my right shoulder. There was some kind of wire or horsehair or something in the shoulder pad that was beginning to bore its way into my flesh. By now, my dashing concrete collar, far from having wilted, had set into the consistency of carborundum, and its incessant abrasive action had removed a wide strip of skin encircling my neck. As for my voice, due to the manic strangulation of the collar, it was now little more than a hoarse croak. When the swallows return to Capistrano, mooed the drummer, who doubled as the band's romantic vocalist. I began to notice Wanda's orchid leering up at me from her shoulder. It was the most repulsive flower I'd ever seen. It was at least 14 inches across. It looked like some kind of overgrown Venus flytrap waiting for the right moment to strike. Deep purple with an obscene yellow tongue that stuck straight out of it and greenish knobs at the end. It clashed audibly with her turquoise dress. It looked like it was breathing, and it clung to her shoulder as if with claws. As I glided back and forth in my graceful box step, my left shoulder began to develop an itch that helped take my mind off the insane itch in my right shoulder, which was beginning to feel like an army of hungry soldier ants on the march. The contortions I made to relieve the agony were camouflaged nicely by a short sneezing fit brought on by the orchid, which was exhaling directly in my face. It had some breath. So was Wanda. Wanda had a heady essence of Smith Brothers cough drops and sauerkraut. When the deep purple falls over sleepy garden walls, warbled the vocalist out of tune into his microphone, which with he seemed to be dancing the tango. The loudspeakers rattled in three-quarter time as Wanda started to sweat through her taffeta. I felt it running down her back. She was sweating a river. My own back was already so wet you could read the label on my undershirt right through the dinner jacket. Back and forth we trudged doggedly across the crowded floor. Another Arthur Murray ad man, Schwartz, was doing exactly the same step with Clara May directly behind me. We were all in a 4-part dog lockstep. As I hit the lower left-hand footprint in my square, the one marked pause, he was hitting the upper right-hand corner of his square. Each time we did that, our elbows dug smartly into each other's ribs. The jungle fragrance of the orchid was getting riper by the minute, and the sweat, which had now saturated my jockey shorts, was pouring down my legs in rivulets. My soaked cummerbund turned 2 shades darker, so that she wouldn't notice. I pulled Wanda closer to me. Sighing, she hugged me back. Wanda was the vaguely chubby type of girl that was so popular at the time, like Judy Garland, by whom she was heavily influenced. She strongly resembled a kind of pink beach ball, but a kind of cute beach ball, soft and rubbery. I felt bumpy things under her taffeta gown with little hooks and knobs. Schwartz caught me a nasty shot in the rib cage just as I bent over to kiss her lightly on the bridge of her nose. It tasted salty. She looked up at me, her great liquid myopic eyes catching the reflection of the red and green lanterns overhead. During a brief intermission, Schwartz and I carried paper cups dripping syrupy punch back to the girls who had just spent some time in the ladies' room, struggling unsuccessfully to repair the damage to the first half. As we were sipping, a face from my dim past floated by from out of nowhere, haughty, alabaster, green-eyed, dangerous. "Hi, Daff," I muttered, spilling a little punch on my gleaming shoes, which had turned during the past hour into a pair of Iron Maidens. "Oh, Howard," she spoke in the breathy, sexy way that such girls always have at proms. "I'd like you to meet Budge Cameron. He's at Princeton." Oh, A languid figure, probably born in a summer formal, loomed overhead. "Budge, this is Howard." "Hiya, fella." It was the first time I'd heard the tight, nasal, swinging jaw accent of the true Princetonian. "Hi, Howard." This was not going to be the last. And they were gone. Funny, I couldn't even remember actually dating her, I reflected as the lights dimmed once again. Me and Wanda swung back into action. They opened into Sleepy Lagoon. 1, 2, 3, pause. 1, 2, 3, pause. It was certain now. I knew it. I had broken out in a raging rash. I felt it spreading like lava across my shoulder blades under the sweat. The horsehair, meanwhile, from the shoulder pad, had penetrated my chest cavity and was working its way toward a vital organ. Trying manfully to ignore it, I stared fixedly at the tiny turquoise ribbon that held Wanda's golden ponytail in place. With troubles of her own, she looked with an equally level gaze at my maroon wool carnation, which by this time had wilted into a clump of lint. All of a sudden it was over. The band played "Good Night, Sweetheart," and we were out, into a driving rain. A violent cloudburst had begun just as we reached the door. My poor little car, the pride and joy of my life, was outside in the lot, with the top down. None of us, of course, had an umbrella. We stood under the canopy as the roaring thunderstorm raged on. It wasn't going to stop. "You guys stay here, I'll get the car," I said finally. After all, I was in charge. It was my car. Plunging into the downpour, I sloshed through the puddles and finally reached the ford. She must have had at least a foot of water in her already. Hair streaming down over my eyes, soaked to the skin and muddied to the knees. I bailed it out with a coffee can from the trunk, slid behind the wheel, and pressed the automatic top lever. Smooth as silk, it began to lift, and stuck halfway up. As the rain poured down in sheets and the lightning flashed, I pounded on the relays. Furiously, lightning flashed. I switched the lever off and on. More thunder. I could see the country club dimly through the downpour. Finally, the top groaned and flapped into place and made some bad sounds as it did so. I threw down the snaps, rolled up the windows, and turned on the ignition. The battery was dead. Oh, my God, the strain of hoisting that goddamn top had drained it dry. I yelled out the window at a passing car. It was Flick in his Chevy. "Give me a push, Flick! The goddamn battery's dead!" This had never, to my knowledge, happened to Fred Astaire. And if it rained on Gene Kelly, he just sang. Flick expertly swung his Chevy around and slammed into my trunk as I eased into gear. When she started to roll, the Ford shuddered and caught. Oh, thank God. Flick backed up and was gone, hollering out the window, "See you at the Rooster!" Wanda, Schwartz, and Clara May piled into the damp, soggy seats, and we took off. Do you know what happens to a maroon wool carnation on a white serge lapel in a heavy June downpour in the Midwest, where it rains not water, but carbolic acid from the steel mill fallout? Huh? Well, I had a dark, wide-spreading maroon stripe that went all the way down to the bottom of my white coat. My French cuffs were covered with grease from fighting the top, and I had cracked a thumbnail, which was beginning to throb. Undaunted, we slogged intrepidly through the rain towards the Red Rooster. Wedged against my side, Wanda looked up at me, oblivious to the elements, with luminous love eyes. She was truly an incurable romantic. Schwartz wisecracked in the back seat, and Clara giggled from time to time. The savage tribal right was nearing its final and most vicious phase. We arrived at the Red Rooster, already crowded with other candidates for adulthood. A giant red neon rooster with a blue neon tail flicked up and down in the rain set the tone for this glamorous establishment. An aura of undefined sin was always connected with the name Red Rooster. Sly winks, nudgings, and adolescent cacklings about what purportedly went on at the Rooster made it the in spot for such a momentous revel. Its waiters were rumored really to be secret henchmen of the mafia. But the only thing that we really knew for sure about the Rooster was that anybody on the far side of 7 years old could buy any known drink without question. This is what made it the real spot for us. The decor ran heavily to red-checkered oilcloth table covers, plastic violets, and the musical background was provided by a legendary jukebox that stood a full 7 feet high, featuring red and blue cascading waterfalls that gushed endlessly through its voluptuous facade. In full 200-watt operation, it could be felt, if not clearly heard, as far as Gary and as far south as Kankakee, a triumph of American aesthetics. Surging with anticipation, I guided Wanda through the uproarious throng of my peers. Schwartz and Clara May trailed behind, exchanging ribald remarks with the gang. We occupied the only remaining table. Immediately, a beady-eyed waiter, hair glistening with Vaseline hair oil, sidled over and hovered like a vulture, quickly distributing the famous Red Rooster a la carte deluxe menu. He stood back, smirking, and waited for us to impress our dates. "Can I bring you anything to drink, gentlemen?" he said, heavily accenting the gentleman. My first impulse was to order my favorite drink of the period, a bottled concoction called KO, the Wonder Drink. But remembering that better things were expected of me on this prom night, I said in my deepest voice, make mine, bourbon." Schwartz grunted in admiration. Wanda ogled me with great swimming, lovesick eyes. Bourbon was the only drink I'd actually heard of. My old man ordered it often down at the Bluebird. I had always wondered what it tasted like. I was soon to find out. "How will you have it, sir?" "Well, in a glass, I guess." I had failed to grasp the subtlety of his question, but the waiter snorted in appreciation of what he thought was my humorous sally. "Ha, ha, ha. Rocks," he continued. Rocks? I had heard about getting your rocks, but never in a restaurant. "Oh, well, what the hell?" "Sure," I said. "Why not? Rocks." All around me, the merry-making throng was swinging into high gear. Carried away by it all, I added a phrase that I heard my old man use often. "And, waiter, make it a triple." I had some vague idea that this was a brand or something. "A triple? Yes, sir, a triple." His eyes snapped wide in respect, I gathered. He knew now that he was in the presence of a serious drinker. The waiter turned his gaze in Schwartz's direction. "And you, sir?" Make it the same." Schwartz had never been a leader. The die was cast. Pink ladies, at the waiter's suggestion, was ordered for the girls, and we then proceeded to scan the immense menu with feigned disinterest. When the waiter returned with our drinks, I ordered, for reasons that even today I am not able to explain, lamb chops, yellow turnips, mashed potatoes, and gravy, a side dish of the famous Red Rooster Roquefort Italian coleslaw, and strawberry shortcake. The others wisely decided to stick with their drinks. Munching breadsticks, Wanda, Schwartz, Claire, and I engaged in sophisticated post-prom repartee. Moment by moment, I felt my strength and maturity, my dashing bonhomie, my clean-cut handsomeness enveloping my friends in its benevolent warmth. Schwartz, too, seemed to scintillate as never before. Clara giggled, and Wanda sighed, overcome by the romance of it all. Even when Flick, seated 3 tables away, clipped Schwartz behind the left ear with a poppy seed roll, our urbanity remained unruffled. We ignored him totally. Before me reposed a sparkling tumbler of beautiful amber liquid. Ice cubes bobbed merrily on its surface, a plastic swizzle stick sporting an enormous Red Rooster sticking out at a jaunty angle. Schwartz was similarly equipped, and the fluffy pink ladies looked lovely in the reflected light of the pulsating jukebox. Now, I had seen my old man deal with just this sort of situation. Raising my beaded glass, I looked around at my companions and said suavely, "Well, here's mud in your eye." Clara giggled, sighed dreamily. Now totally in love with this man of the world, Wanda joined in. She sat just across from the table on this, our finest night. "Yep," Schwartz parried wittily, hoisting his glass high and slopping a little bourbon on his pants as he did so. Swiftly, I brought the bourbon to my lips intending to down it in a single devil-may-care draft, the way Gary Cooper used to do it at the Silver Dollar Saloon. I did, and Schwartz followed suit. Down it went, a screaming 90-proof rocket, searing savagely down my gullet. For an instant I sat stunned, unable to comprehend what had happened. Eyes watering copiously, I had a brief urge to sneeze, but my throat seemed to be paralyzed. Wanda and Clara May swam before my misted vision, and Schwartz seemed to have disappeared under the table. He popped back up again, face beet red, eyes bugging, jaw slack, tongue lolling. Oh, isn't this romantic? Isn't this the most wonderful night in all our lives? I will forever treasure the memories of this wonderful night. From far off, echoing as from some deep subterranean tunnel, I heard Wanda speaking these words. Deep down in the pit of my stomach, I felt crackling flames licking at my innards. I struggled to reply, to maintain my elan, my fabled savoir-faire. I couldn't talk. Something paralyzed. Yeah, I finally managed with superhuman effort. Wanda swam hazily into focus. She was gazing across the table at me with large, liquid, adoring eyes. Another, gentlemen? Another? The waiter was back, still smirking. Schwartz nodded dumbly. I just sat there, afraid to move. An instant later, 2 more triple bourbons materialized in front of us. They looked even bigger than the first. Clara raised her pink lady high and said reverently, "Let's all of us drink to the happiest night of our lives." There was no turning back. Another screamer rocketed down the hatch. For an instant, it seemed as though this one wasn't going to be as lethal as the one in the first shot, but the room suddenly tilted sideways. I felt torrents of sweat pouring down my forehead. Clinging to the edge of the table, I watched as Schwartz gagged across from me. Flick, I noticed, had just chug-a-lugged his 3rd rum and coke and was eating a cheeseburger with the works. The conflagration deep inside me was now heavily out of control. Clearly, my feet were smoking. My diaphragm heaved convulsively, juggling my cummerbund, and Schwartz began to shrink, his face alternately between purple red and chalk white, his eyes black holes staring fixedly at the ketchup bottle. He seemed to be talking to it. He sat stock still. Wanda, meanwhile, cooed on ecstatically, but I was beyond understanding what she was saying. Faster and faster, in ever-widening circles, the room, the jukebox, the crowd swirled dizzily about me. In all the excitement of preparation for the prom, I realized that I hadn't eaten a single thing all day. Out of the maelstrom, a plate mysteriously appeared before me. Paper-pantied lamb chops hissing in bubbling grease, piled yellow turnips, gray mashed potatoes, awash with thick brown gravy. Maybe this will help, I thought incoherently and stupidly. Maybe this will help me. Grasping at my knife and fork firmly as I could, I paused and tried to whack off a piece of meat. Suddenly, the landscape tilted again, 45 degrees to starboard, and the chop I was about to attack skidded off my plate, plowing a swath through the mashed potatoes and right into the aisle. Pretending not to notice, I addressed myself to the remaining chop, which slid around, eluding my grasp, until I finally managed to skewer it with my fork. Hacking off a chunk, I jammed it fiercely, mouthward, missing the target completely. Still impaled on my fork, the chop slithered over my cheekbone, spraying gravy as it went, all over my white lapels. On the next try, I had better luck, and I finally managed to get the whole chop down, probably the bone, too. To my surprise, I didn't feel any better. Maybe the turnips will help, I thought. Lowering my head to within an inch of the plate to prevent embarrassing mishaps, I shoveled them in. But the flames within me only seemed fanned by this stuff. Higher and higher they went. I tried the potatoes and gravy. My legs began to turn cold. They were made out of ice. I wolfed down the Red Rooster Roquefort Italian coleslaw. My stomach began to rise like a helium balloon, bobbing slowly up the alimentary canal. It was coming right up through my throat. My nose, now low over the heaping dish of strawberry shortcake piled high with whipped cream and running with juice. I knew at last for a dead certainty what I had to do before it happened right here in front of everybody. I struggled to my feet. A strange rubbery numbness had struck my extremities. I tottered from chair to chair, grasping for the wall. There was a buzzing in my ears. 20 seconds later, I was down on my knees, gripping the bowl of the John like a life preserver in pitching seas. Schwartz, imitating me as usual, lay prostrate on the tiles beside me, his body racked with heaving sobs. Lamb chops, bourbon, turnips, mashed potatoes, coleslaw, all of it came rushing out of my mouth, my nose, my ears, my very soul. Then Schwartz opened up, and we took turns retching and shuddering. A head thrust itself between us, directly into the pot. It was Flick, moaning dejectedly, crying out wretchedly. Up came the cheeseburgers, the rum and cokes, the pretzels, the potato chips, punch, gumdrops, a corned beef sandwich, a fingernail or two, everything that he had eaten for the last month. For long minutes the three of us lay there, limp and quivering, smelling to high heaven, too weak to get up. It was the absolute high point of the junior prom. The rest was anticlimax. Finally, we returned to the table, ashen-faced and shaking. Schwartz, his coat stained and rumpled, sat zombie-like across from me. The girls didn't say much. Pink ladies just aren't bourbon. But our little group played the scene out bravely to the end. My dinner jacket was now even more redolent and disreputable than when I'd first seen it in the hangar at Al's. It was worse than when I had first seen it. And my bow tie, which had hung for a while by one clip, somehow had disappeared down the John completely, perhaps flushed into eternity with all the rest. But as time wore on, my bearing, my hearing, my eyesight began slowly to return. My legs began to lose their rubberiness, and the room slowly resumed its even keel, at least even enough to consider getting up and leaving. The waiter seemed to know. He returned as if on cue, bearing a slip of paper. "Oh, the damages, gentlemen, the damages." Taking the old man's 20 out of my wallet, I handed it to him with as much of a flourish as I could muster. There wouldn't have been any point to looking over the check. I wouldn't have been able to read it anyway. In one last attempt to recoup my cosmopolitan image, I said offhandedly, "Keep the change." Wanda beamed in unconcealed ecstasy. The drive home in the damp car was not quite the same as the one that had begun the evening so many weeks earlier. Our rapidly fermenting coats made the enclosed air rich and gamey, and Schwartz, who had stopped belching, sat with head pulled low between his shoulder blades, staring straight ahead fixedly. Women always survive. Only the girls preserve the joyousness of the occasion. In a daze, I dropped off Schwartz and Clara May, and drove in silence towards Wanda's home, the faint light of dawn beginning to show in the east. We stood on her porch for the last ritual encounter. A chill dawn wind rustled the lilac bushes. "Oh, this was the most wonderful, wonderful night of my whole life. I always dreamed the prom would be like this," breathed Wanda, gazing passionately up into my watering eyes. "Yeah, me too," was all I could manage. I knew what was expected of me now. Her eyes closed dreamily, swaying slightly. I leaned forward, and the faint odor of sauerkraut from her parted lips coiled slowly up my nostrils. This was not in the script. I knew I'd better get off that porch fast, or else. Backpedaling desperately down the stairs, I blurted, "Bye, bye," and fighting down my rising gorge, clamped my mouth tight, leaped into the Ford, burned rubber, and tore off into the dawn. 2 blocks away, I squealed to a stop alongside a vacant lot containing only a huge Sherman-Williams paint sign. "We cover the world," it aptly read. In the blessed darkness behind the sign, concealed from prying eyes, I completed the final rite of the ceremony. The sun was just rising as I swung the car up the driveway and eased myself quietly into the kitchen. The old man who was going fishing that morning with Zudok sat at the enameled table sipping black coffee. He looked up as I came in. He was in no mood for idle chatter. "You look like you had a hell of a prom, kid," was all he said. I sure did. The yellow light glared harshly on my muddy pants, my maroon-streaked, vomit-stained white coat, my cracked fingernail, my greasy shirt. I'd lost a shoe somewhere. "You want anything to eat?" he said sardonically. "How about something to eat, kid?" At the word eat, my stomach heaved convulsively. I shook my head numbly. That's what I thought. He said, well, get some sleep. You'll feel better in a couple of days when your head stops banging. I've been there, kid. He went back to reading his paper. I staggered into my bedroom, dropping bits of clothing as I went. My soggy Hollywood paisley cummerbund, the veteran of another gala night, was flung beneath the dresser as I toppled in the bed. My brother muttered in his sleep across the room. He was still a kid, but his time would come.